And it's strange because a lot of this goes out also in the notion of like how much certainty can you assert a certain position with. And I find it problematic to assert a material conception of the universe that's based on just blind operation of physical and chemical laws when you don't have a way of predicting even the simplest actions. There is no model that can accurately predict, right? And so if it's not predictive, and if it becomes an ex post facto explanation, in other words, after it happened, you're like, oh, it happened because of X, Y, and Z. Well, that's a confirmation bias. That's an ex post facto explanation. That is not predictive. So it's not predictive and it's not falsifiable. Those are the two features of a scientific theory. And this is where, like, I believe science can bring you all the way up to agnosticism.
Yeah.
And you could say, okay, I'm just not sure. Yeah. And I'm very comfortable in this position of agnosticism. Now, I believe that you can't live life as an agnostic, really. You have to make judgment calls. You have to make decisions. You have to root your behavior in some pattern or towards some good. And so you're going to have to make a judgment call at some point. You could be an agnostic for a certain period of time, but sooner or later, life is going to call you to task to prioritize what you really believe in or prioritize what you consider to be good. But I feel a lot of what I see in science is a lot of, like material science and the new atheists, is a lot of what I see with fundamentalists in religion. And that is a complete discomfort with uncertainty and a desire to have an explanatory style that pretends to understand everything about the universe. Mm-hmm. And that to me is inimical. It's absolutely not. The core genius I find in religion is, let's call it the opposite of Nietzsche. Let's call it the invention of God. Let's call it a concept whereby we say, oh, wow, we are actually very limited. Mm-hmm. Everything we experience, everything we know, there are much higher forms of knowing, much higher forms of caring, much higher forms of order that we can just very imperfectly have a relationship with. And I choose to have a relationship with that as opposed to denying it. Yeah. It's a sentiment of humility that comes from an encounter with God, not a sentiment of, oh, this is what it is, and boom, 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 boom. And I see that with the new atheists are a form of fundamentalism in that it's...
But they love fundamentalists, by the way.
Yeah, like, that's who they address.
That's why they address.
Yeah, they address them. They address each other.
Yeah, because they are really at the same level of thinking. Yeah. I totally agree. But the fundamentalists, most of the difficulty, especially modern fundamentalists, is that they confuse, again, levels of causality and levels of meaning. You know, because in many ways, the fundamentalists have been seduced by a kind of scientific reductionism, but then they just slap God on top, right? And so it's like, basically, you know, they want their holy text to be scientific text. They want their traditional description to be scientific descriptions. It's like, it's absolutely ridiculous. And there's nothing more ridiculous than looking at Genesis 1 and thinking that that's a scientific text. You know, God creates grass before he creates the sun. We have a bit of a problem, like in terms of this being some kind of scientific description. And so, but that's the, and then what the you know, the fundamentalists will find some crazy thing, like I've heard them, you know, like the young earth creationist types. They'll like find some crazy explanation for why physically, like scientifically, God would have created the earth and grass before he created, you know, the stars, right?
It's like, yeah, I don't think you want to go there, man.
Yeah, man, no, seriously, it's dark stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why there's a quote by, I believe, Rick Doblin, who said that mysticism is the antidote to fundamentalism because it's the acceptance of mystery. With fundamentalism, there is no mystery.
Yeah. There's a desire to kind of contain God completely in a box and in a kind of systematic causality. When you look at the revelations of God, at least in the Bible, like at least in our traditions, that, you know, there is a sense in which God says, you cannot see my face, right? Where God, you know, represents himself hidden behind veils and veils, because there is a sense in which you're trying to engage with something which is beyond the level that I have access to. And that is necessarily bound in mystery, right? In the same way, like I said before, that if you were trying to take just the parts of the car, the reason for the car is a form of mystery to the parts. It joins them together. It brings them together towards purpose. but you don't have access to it in the parts. And that's true of, it's the same thing. Like if you just quantify the interactions between your family and you try to find the identity of your family by quantifying the interactions, you're not going to find it, right? It's something pulling you together that's above you. And it necessarily manifests itself as a form of mystery at the level that we are, because it's beyond it, right? And so I think that's important to understand that the idea that God is a mystery, that God is beyond, it's not a superstitious, arbitrary thing. It actually is the way reality functions at every level, and at that, and the level that we now encounter this transcendent aspect of the world, then we have the same approach where it is like, I'm not going to find, God is not a phenomena. I can't find him. He's not hiding under a rock. That's not how it is. He's actually that which brings all the phenomena together.
That's not the order of reality that you have to be attuned in on some level to understand the phenomenon of God.
What do you mean? Sorry.
That's not the level of reality.
No, exactly.
Right.
You're not attending to the right level.
Right.
You have to kind of keep, put your head up and get a sense of it's that which brings it together,
And in terms of because a lot of these, when we talk about these phenomena, like reducing God to something you can understand or denying it altogether, a lot of these conceptions are also embedded in very human endeavors. Yeah. So they will have career consequences. They will have political consequences. It's entangled with these human. And just before we get onto the political, I want to know what you think about this, is that when I was looking at a lot of this fundamentalist type religious thinking, and also like the new atheist type thinking, I there's a sense of certainty that I'm just uncomfortable with on a metaphysical level. Mm-hmm. And when I read the stories of the prophets in the Bible, it's interesting to me in our tradition how encounters with God leave a prophet diminished, injured, humbled. They don't leave him powerful, exercising, earthly power over others and getting super necessary. No, there's always a sense of like, oh, wow, I was stupid. Oh my God. It's always, the revelation of God is always an expression of the limits and the ignorance of the human. You leave it feeling, your ego feeling diminished, but your spirit, in a sense, having been enriched.
Yeah. No, it's a difficult conundrum, right? Because, and this is really an argument for all kinds of issues, right? And so the way in which we come together in unity is always a mystery. It's not fully accessible, right? But there is also, once that happens, there is a need to preserve that unity, right? You think about it that way. So it's like, the way in which a nation exists together is kind of mysterious. Like, okay, so we just live on a land, and now we're the one thing? Like, why are we one thing? Why is there a border between Canada and the United States? What makes the United States one thing and Canada one thing? It's quite mysterious, right? And you can explain some of the levels, but ultimately there's a type of mystery that holds that together. And so, but once a being exists, there are certain aspects of the being, certain aspects of the phenomena of unity that will need to defend its existence. And that's inevitable, right? So it's like you have a family, so now you have a door and you lock it because you don't want people that are not part of your family to come in and hurt the people that you care about. And that's an inevitable part. And some of the aspects of fundamentalism, as you call it, are in some ways necessary for the protection of the being. So you have watchdogs that are like, hey, no, hey, did you, it's like mom asking the kids, did you lock the door tonight? Don't come back after 10, right? It's like, because
Did you just call my mom a fundamentalist?
it's like, I want to, I set rules. I tell my kids to come back early.
Like clear black and white rules and protecting,
because I want to protect the unity of the thing I care about. And so the difficulty with that is that can also sometimes go astray or become excessive. And then people start to protect something that they forget what it's for and
what the purpose was.
They forget what the purpose was in the first place, right? And we have that, we experience that in our businesses, in whatever team we have. At some point, we start to be defensive and we want to protect our little team in the company, and we stop to think like, well, actually, okay, so I want to protect my little team here, but what exactly am I serving? What's the purpose? And so I think it's important to understand that. In some ways, there is a way, like there's a certain compassionate approach we can have. As you notice, I don't like fundamentalists very much, but I can have a certain amount of compassion in understanding that the assault of the modern world on the religious sphere has created a bunch of warriors that are trying to protect their body. Right?
And it's interesting that Muslim fundamentalism that people talk about and so forth is an extremely modern phenomenon. Definitely comes after the Industrial Revolution, so it would fit what you're saying as almost a response to the assault of material science on the entire possibility of religion, on the entire possibility of an enchanted divine world.
Yeah, so we don't want to defend the actions that they pose. That's not the point. But the point is, if you want to mitigate the effects of something, the first thing to do is to understand it. So to understand the fact that in some ways fundamentalism is a side effect of modernism, because it is a reaction to the assault of modernity and Enlightenment thinking on religion, then we can say, okay, well, how can we mitigate that and then point these guard dogs, or at least connect them to something that's more transcendent, that's more mystical, that's more mysterious. I don't think it's totally impossible in some cases. I don't know. Depends which one, though.
Yeah. Depends how far they've gone.
Depends how far they've gone in the kind of